Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just like to explain to any of the New Zealanders who are listening to this debate or watching it that normally at second reading a bill would have gone to Select Committee. The Select Committee would have invited public submissions. The Select Committee would then have heard those submissions. Submitters normally make quite constructive comments on the policy in the bill, any of the deficiencies in it, and suggest amendments and how it could be improved. It's a place too where you pick up any major defects in the drafting. We haven't had that opportunity with this bill, and that's another of the reasons that the Green Party is opposing it, because it's being forced through under urgency, yet it concerns public protected lands, forests that New Zealanders campaigned for 30 years or more to protect from native forest logging, yet the public is being given absolutely no say in letting loggers, chainsaws, haulers and skidders back onto what is supposed to be protected conservation land. DOC is supposed to manage those lands in trust, hold them in trust for all New Zealanders and manage them on all of our behalf. Yet by pushing this through under urgency, denying the public to have a say, it's highlighting again just how anti-democratic this government is. And one of the reasons I think that the government wants to push it through under urgency is that it knows when New Zealanders wake up to the major assault on our protected areas, they will oppose this law. The Select Committee, if we had had a public process, would have been inundated with submissions against the bill. Mr Speaker, the Green Party wants more jobs on the coast, but we want them to be well-paid, long-term jobs, not boom and bust ones as these logging ones will be. When Nick Smith was asked today what he would do to ensure that jobs stayed on the coast, he wouldn't commit to that. In fact, he's made it very clear that he's not interested in that. So it's a very cynical manipulation for the Minister to promise that this bill is about jobs. And I certainly agree with the scenario which Richard Prosser outlined in the first reading. And that's because this bill cuts across the Forest Act and the restrictions which the Forest Act puts on the export of unprocessed timber. This bill allows the export of sawn timber, of stumps and roots and tree ferns, so the timber use won't be restricted to New Zealand. Again, it is misleading of Minister Brownlee to claim that the bill is about allowing New Zealanders to enjoy the ambience of native timber. These logs will be exported with very little processing. The export of unprocessed timber won't create jobs in New Zealand. It will simply increase the market for native timber, and that will increase the pressure on private forests, on private land. We have been here before when we had the export of native wood chips. That led to huge forest destruction in Southland and elsewhere in Nelson. So, Mr Speaker, this bill will not only see the market flooded with native timber, it will undermine the prices that those private landowners are receiving for forest which they are allowed to log by the Ministry of Forestry under the Forest Act. And if the Minister was really serious about restarting the native forest logging industry, then those loggers would need more than the 5 years they're going to get under this bill. So I agree with Ruth Dyson that this is potentially a Trojan horse for changing the law to allow much greater access to our protected areas to log them. So, Minister, come clean. What is it? Is it a quick and dirty law to allow loggers to opportunistically plunder West Coast forests, or is this the first step in allowing logging across all of our conservation lands? The storm has done the damage. You're doing more damage now by allowing the loggers in, the skidders, the haulers to create those destructive practices where you mess up quite large areas in order to extract the timber. Yes, Minister, I have. One of the most disappointing times I've ever had is walking through logged forest and seeing areas that have been cleared. The storm damage is natural. The forest, as it rots, those rotting logs are a natural part of the forest system. At the moment, Mr Speaker, there are about 50,000 hectares of native forest which can be logged on private and Maori land and are managed for sustainable management under the Forest Act. Before Cyclone Ita, the logging of those areas on private forest generated about $5 million annually. it provided about 6,500 cubic metres of Rimu timber, but those 6,400 cubic metres were just 30% of the volume of Rimu which Ministry of Primary Industry had approved for logging. So the existing market hadn't even been able to absorb 70% of the timber which MPI had approved for logging. So what this bill will do, by opening up conservation land, is flood the market with native timber. Where will that go? It won't be used in New Zealand because it can't be taken up by the market here. It will be exported. Why are we exporting our forests, our cathedrals, offshore to be used however? And Mr Speaker, the Ministry of Primary Industry had KPMG do a value analysis of privately owned Indigenous forests last year. It didn't look at the forest value for ecosystem services, for preventing soil erosion, for regulating water flow, but it did look at the annual value for logging. KPMG said that for the logging industry to expand, there needed to be a significant investment in kiln drying because beech is useless as a timber unless it's properly dried. And there needed to be a significant investment in heavy lift helicopters. The kiln drying was estimated to cost $1 million and the heavy lift helicopters $4 to $5 million. So what is this government going to do? Is it going to hand out subsidies to the native forest logging industry in the way that it's doing to irrigators to allow us to go back to the future, back to the 1950s when native forest logging was expanding in New Zealand? Or is this just, Minister, a dirty little bill to allow the loggers to opportunistically plunder conservation land? And by promoting native forest logging on the West Coast, and the Minister is effectively saying that he has absolutely no confidence in the work of the West Coast Development Trust. The West Coast got $120 million in 2001 when native forest logging ceased in order to invest in alternative employment and look at adjusting to the end of native forest logging. The Trust has handed out over $56 million to 109 different commercial development opportunities. Yet the Minister's saying, no, that's not enough, we've got to allow more logging. So, Mr Speaker, this is a very dirty little bill, but I suspect that it's a Trojan horse for allowing much more logging on much wider areas of conservation land. And because, as I said in the first reading, it doesn't restrict the logging to helicopters, we will see this highly damaging skidders and haulers. They will introduce weeds, they will damage existing healthy timber, they will compromise the forest for further regeneration because they're heavy, they compact the soils, they prevent seedlings to regenerate. And, Mr Speaker, one of the problems is that there are no heavy lift helicopters operating in New Zealand at the moment, as I understand it. So that means that the Minister, with this bill, is opening up conservation lands not to the sensitive helicopter extraction, but to the highly damaging traditional methods of logging extraction with haulers and skidders and the like. This is a very bad bill from the process that's being used to force it through under urgency with no opportunity for the public to have a say, and by opening up lands that are supposed to be protected to logging and turning the Department of Conservation from an agency that was supposed to preserve and protect our natural resources into one that's about regulating logging, learning how forestry works and giving the approval to all of these skidders, all of these chainsaws to damage and desecrate our protected areas.
Shane Ardern.
Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise in support of the West Coast windblown timber